Hello, my beautiful souls, and welcome back to another heartwarming Christmas story. Before we dive into tonight's tale, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below, because I absolutely love seeing how far our little Christmas community reaches. There's something magical about knowing we're all gathered here together, from different corners of the globe, sharing in the warmth and wonder of these stories. So please, let me know where you're joining us from today. Now, get comfortable. Grab your favorite blanket, pour yourself some hot cocoa or tea, maybe light a candle, and let me transport you to a snowy Christmas Eve where one act of kindness created a miracle that nobody saw coming. The snow had been falling steadily since 3 in the afternoon, and by the time Sarah Mitchell finished her shift at the diner, the entire town of Pine Ridge looked like something out of a Christmas card. The kind of scene that would make tourists stop and take pictures. The kind that made children press their noses against frosted windows in wonder. The street lamps cast a golden glow on the fresh powder, and every storefront window displayed elaborate Christmas scenes. Miniature villages with tiny ice skaters, nativity scenes with hand-painted figures, decorated trees that sparkled with tinsel and lights. The sound of Christmas carols drifted from the speakers mounted on the light poles, their cheerful melodies mixing with the crunch of snow under her feet. But for Sarah, trudging through the ankle-deep snow in her worn boots with holes she'd tried to patch with duct tape, it was just another obstacle between her and home. Her feet were wet, had been wet for the past 2 hours of her shift, and she could feel the beginning of a blister forming on her left heel. The cold had seeped through the duct tape, through her thin socks, until her toes felt like blocks of ice. She'd learned to ignore it, the same way she'd learned to ignore the persistent ache in her lower back from standing for 8 hours straight, the way she'd learned to smile through the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. Home. The word felt both comforting and heavy. A small 2-bedroom apartment above the hardware store on Main Street, where her 7-year-old daughter Emma waited with Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor who watched Emma whenever Sarah worked late, which lately had been almost every night. The apartment wasn't much. The pipes rattled in the winter. The heating was temperamental at best, and there was a permanent water stain on the ceiling in the living room that Sarah had tried unsuccessfully to paint over 3 times. But it was theirs. She'd managed to make it cozy with secondhand furniture she'd refinished herself, curtains she'd sewn from clearance fabric, and Emma's artwork covering every available wall space. There were pictures of rainbows and unicorns, family portraits where Sarah was always drawn impossibly tall with a crown, and elaborate scenes from Emma's vivid imagination. Each piece of art was a reminder of why Sarah pushed herself so hard, why she worked double shifts until her feet bled and her back screamed in protest. Sarah pulled her thin coat tighter around herself, her breath creating small clouds in the freezing air. The tips of her fingers had gone numb despite the threadbare gloves she wore, gloves that Emma had given her last Christmas, carefully wrapped in newspaper comics because they couldn't afford wrapping paper. Sarah had cried when she'd opened them, not because they were particularly nice gloves. They were from the dollar store, already coming apart at the seams, but because Emma had saved up her allowance for 3 months to buy them. 3 months of putting aside the single dollar Sarah gave her each week for helping with chores, money Sarah knew her daughter had wanted to spend on art supplies or the occasional candy bar. The memory made Sarah's chest tight even now, made her more determined than ever to give Emma the Christmas she deserved this year. Her mind was calculating, as it always did these days. Calculating how much she'd made in tips tonight, $43.67, counted 3 times to be sure. 2 regulars had been extra generous, slipping her $20 bills with whispered Merry Christmas wishes that had almost made her cry right there at their tables. Adding that to what she'd saved, carefully tucked away in an envelope hidden in her closet, she was still $70 short of what she needed for Emma's Christmas present. The deluxe art set her daughter had been dreaming about for months, the one she'd circled in every store catalog that came in the mail, the one with 72 colored pencils and watercolor paints and special paper, the one she'd mentioned casually every few days, as if she wasn't really hoping, as if she didn't want to put too much pressure on her mom, as if she didn't see the worry lines that had become permanent fixtures on Sarah's face. The thing was, Emma never asked for much. She never complained when Sarah had to work double shifts, when she spent more evenings with Mrs. Chen than with her own mother. She never whined about their cramped apartment or the fact that her clothes came from the thrift store, carefully selected and sometimes altered by Sarah's unpracticed hand. She never pointed out that other kids had more toys, bigger houses, fathers who came to school events. She just smiled that brilliant, gap-toothed smile that could light up the darkest room, helped with whatever she could. Setting the table, folding laundry, even attempting to cook simple meals when Sarah worked late, and told her mom every single night, without fail, that she was the best mom in the whole world. That smile, that unconditional love, that fierce loyalty from someone so small. It's what kept Sarah going. It's what made her drag herself out of bed when the alarm went off at 5 in the morning. It's what made her keep smiling at rude customers who complained about their coffee being too cold or their eggs being too runny. It's what made her believe, despite everything, that they were going to be okay. And she was determined, absolutely determined, to give Emma the Christmas she deserved. Not a Christmas that competed with the wealthy families in town, not something extravagant, just a Christmas where her daughter's one wish came true. Where Emma could wake up on Christmas morning and find that art set under their little tree and know, absolutely know, that her mother had heard her, had seen her, had moved heaven and earth to make it happen. The town square was quiet at this hour, most sensible people already home with their families, probably sitting around dinner tables laden with more food than they could eat, probably exchanging gifts and laughter while fires crackled in their fireplaces. Sarah could picture it so clearly it hurt. The Norman Rockwell perfection that had always seemed just out of her reach. But Sarah cut through the square anyway because it shaved off a few minutes from her walk. And those minutes mattered when every step felt like trudging through cement. Her feet ached in a way that made her wonder if she was getting too old for waitressing, though she was only 32. 32 but feeling 50 on nights like this. She was just tired. So deeply, bone-achingly tired in a way that sleep never seemed to fix. The kind of tired that lived in her soul, that had taken up permanent residence the day Emma's father had walked out on them with nothing but a note on the kitchen table that read, "I can't do this anymore," in his careless scrawl. No explanation, no apology, no forwarding address. Just those 5 words and the sound of the door closing behind him, a sound that still echoed in Sarah's nightmares. That's when she saw him. At first, he was just a dark shape slumped against the base of the town's enormous Christmas tree, the one that had been decorated with hundreds of lights and topped with a golden star that could be seen from blocks away. The tree was Pine Ridge's pride and joy, donated each year by the Johnson family who owned the tree farm on the outskirts of town. It took a crew of 10 men to set it up, and the lighting ceremony was a town-wide event that drew hundreds. Children made wishes as the mayor flipped the switch, and people said those wishes always came true. Sarah had brought Emma to the ceremony 3 weeks ago, had watched her daughter close her eyes tight and whisper something to the star. Sarah hadn't asked what she'd wished for, afraid it might be something she couldn't provide. As Sarah got closer to the tree, her footsteps slowing despite the cold, she realized it was a man, and he wasn't moving. Snow had begun to accumulate on his shoulders and dark hair, dusting him white like he was becoming part of the winter landscape. His head was tilted at an angle that looked uncomfortable, his arms wrapped loosely around himself. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought he might actually be a statue, some new art installation the town council had approved without her knowledge. But no, she could see now, barely, the slight rise and fall of his chest. He was breathing, but barely. Every instinct told her to keep walking. It was Christmas Eve. She needed to get home to Emma, who was probably already in her pajamas, probably already trying to sneak peeks out the window for Santa's sleigh. Mrs. Chen would be tired, ready to go home to her own family. Sarah didn't have time for this, didn't have energy for this. She didn't know this person. And in a world that had shown her plenty of reasons to be cautious, a world where trusting the wrong person could cost you everything, stopping for strangers wasn't exactly wise. Besides, he was probably just drunk, sleeping it off. It happened even in a small town like Pine Ridge. Old Mr. Peterson from the hardware store below her apartment spent more nights sleeping on park benches than in his own bed. The police knew him by name, would drive him home if they found him, but mostly people just let him be. But something made her stop. Something made her feet, which had been so eager to get home just moments before, root themselves to the snowy ground. Maybe it was the way he was dressed. A suit, expensive looking even under the dusting of snow, the kind of suit Sarah had only seen in magazines. The fabric looked soft, probably Italian or something equally beyond her comprehension. The shirt underneath was crisp white, or had been before the snow. His shoes were leather, polished, completely inappropriate for this weather. No coat, No gloves, no scarf, nothing to protect him from the elements that were quite literally trying to kill him. Or maybe it was the fact that she'd been that person once. Lost and alone, drowning in despair so deep she hadn't been sure she'd ever find her way to the surface. When Emma's father had walked out, Sarah had spent 3 days in bed, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but stare at the ceiling and wonder how she was going to survive. Emma had been just 2 years old, still in diapers, still needing constant care. Sarah had no family, her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19, and she'd been an only child. No close friends, because she'd isolated herself in her relationship, the way her ex had wanted. No money saved because he'd controlled their finances. She'd been utterly, completely alone with a toddler depending on her. She'd ended up at a homeless shelter, though it had taken every ounce of pride she had to walk through those doors. A kind woman there, a volunteer named Margaret with silver hair and gentle eyes, had found her sobbing in the parking lot, too ashamed to go inside. Margaret had sat with her for 2 hours in the cold, just listening, not judging. She'd made sure Emma had a warm meal, and Sarah had a safe place to figure out her next move. That kindness, offered by a stranger who had no obligation to care, had saved Sarah's life. Had saved Emma's life. It had been the turning point, the moment when Sarah had decided that she would survive, that she would build a life for her daughter no matter what it took. "Sir?" Sarah's voice came out softer than she intended, barely more than a whisper carried away by the wind. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time, her voice cutting through the quiet night. "Sir, are you okay?" No response. Not even a flicker of movement. Her heart started to race, pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, feel it in her throat. Oh God, what if he was dead? What if she was looking at a frozen corpse in the town square on Christmas Eve? What if she'd been walking past while someone took their last breath just feet away from her? The thought made her stomach turn, made guilt claw at her chest even though she'd only just arrived. She thought about the other people who must have walked through this square tonight. How many of them had seen this man and kept walking, convinced themselves it wasn't their problem, that someone else would help, that he was fine. She knelt down, ignoring the cold snow that immediately soaked through her jeans, seeping through the worn denim in seconds. The cold was shocking, biting, but she barely registered it. Her knees pressed against the frozen ground as she reached out with a trembling hand to touch his shoulder. His suit jacket was wet, practically frozen, the expensive fabric doing nothing to protect him from the elements. "Sir, can you hear me?" She gave his shoulder a gentle shake, then a harder one when he still didn't respond. "Please, please wake up." The man stirred, groaning softly, a sound so quiet Sarah almost missed it under the whisper of falling snow. Relief flooded through Sarah so intensely her eyes burned with sudden tears. Not dead then. Not dead. Thank God, thank God, thank God. Just unconscious. Or close to it. She could see him shivering now, violent tremors running through his body like electrical currents, his teeth chattering so hard she worried he might crack them. His lips had taken on a blue tinge that terrified her, and his skin was pale, almost translucent in the glow of the Christmas lights. She'd read somewhere once that when you got hypothermia, your body started shutting down non-essential functions to preserve your core. This man looked like he was well past that point, like his body was giving up the fight. Hey, you need to wake up!" She shook him a little harder, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. "You can't stay out here. You'll freeze to death. Do you understand me? You will die if you stay here." Oh, she was practically yelling now, loud enough that if anyone had been nearby, they would have heard. But the square was empty, everyone safe and warm in their homes. It was just Sarah and this stranger and the falling snow and the twinkling lights that suddenly seemed mocking in their cheerfulness. His eyes opened just slightly, revealing a sliver of the most striking blue Sarah had ever seen, even glazed with confusion and clouded with cold. They were remarkable, the color of a summer sky, bright and clear and completely at odds with the winter night surrounding them. He looked at her with such profound confusion, as if he couldn't quite figure out where he was or who she might be, as if he'd been somewhere else entirely and was only just returning to his body. "Cold," he mumbled, the word barely coherent, his tongue thick and clumsy in his mouth. So cold. His voice was educated, refined even in his current state, with the kind of accent that spoke of private schools and country clubs. I know you are. Can you stand? We need to get you inside somewhere." Sarah looked around desperately, her eyes scanning the empty square. Everything was closed. The diner where she worked had locked up an hour ago, Mr. Peterson turning off the lights and heading home to his own family gathering. The shops lining the square were dark, their cheerful window displays illuminated, but their doors firmly locked. Even the gas station on the corner had closed early for the holiday, an unprecedented move that had annoyed some people but that Sarah had understood. Everyone deserved to be with family on Christmas Eve. The church was at least 3 blocks away, and she didn't think this man could make it that far. Didn't think she could support his weight for that distance. He was tall, probably 6 feet or more, and while he wasn't heavy set, he was solid muscle beneath that expensive suit. She was 5'3" on a good day and maybe 110 pounds soaking wet. Physics weren't on her side here. Her apartment, it was the closest option, just 2 blocks away if they cut through the alley behind the hardware store. Mrs. Chen would probably still be there, which meant Sarah wouldn't be alone with a stranger. That was important, she told herself. Safety first, always, especially with Emma in the apartment. And Emma would be asleep by now anyway. It was past 9, and her daughter was usually out cold by 8:30, exhausted from the excitement of Christmas Eve. She'd probably be dreaming of Santa and reindeer, and all the magic that 7-year-olds still believed in without question. It would be fine. It had to be fine, because Sarah couldn't just leave him here to die. She couldn't be the person who walked past, who convinced herself it wasn't her problem. She'd looked into his eyes, seen the human being beneath the expensive clothes, and now he was her responsibility whether she liked it or not. Okay, listen to me. Sarah moved around to his side, positioning herself so she could get leverage. I'm going to help you up, and we're going to walk to my place. It's not far. Just 2 blocks. Can you do that? I need you to help me here. I need you to try. She slipped her arm under his, feeling his body heat even through his jacket. Or rather, feeling the lack of it. He was so cold he might as well have been made of ice. She tried to leverage him upward, her muscles straining with the effort, her back screaming in protest. For a terrifying moment, she didn't think it was going to work. He was too heavy, she was too small, and the snow made everything slippery. But then something in him seemed to understand. Some survival instinct kicked in, and he managed to get his legs under him, pushing up with whatever strength he had left. He managed to get his legs under him, leaning heavily on Sarah, so heavily she thought they might both go down. His arm draped across her shoulders, his weight pressing down on her like a physical burden. And together, they stumbled out of the square and down Main Street. Each step felt like a marathon, each foot forward a minor victory. The man kept trying to speak, his lips moving against words that wouldn't form properly, but his words were slurred, nonsensical fragments that might have been apologies or might have been something else entirely. Sorry, didn't mean, shouldn't have. The phrases drifted into the night air, incomplete and confused. Sarah just kept encouraging him forward, her voice steady even as her body shook with effort. That's it! Just a little further. You're doing great. 1 foot in front of the other. Almost there. Stay with me. Don't you dare give up on me now. They passed the darkened storefronts, their reflections ghostly in the windows. A small woman supporting a tall man, both of them covered in snow, moving like a single organism through the winter night. Sarah was grateful the streets were empty, that no one was around to see them, to ask questions, to potentially call the police thinking she was being assaulted, or that the man was drunk. She didn't have time to explain, didn't have energy to deal with well-meaning interference. By the time they reached the entrance to her apartment building, a narrow door sandwiched between the hardware store and what used to be a bakery, Sarah was sweating despite the cold, and every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Her lower back felt like someone had driven a knife into it and was twisting. Her shoulders burned, her arms trembled with exhaustion, but they'd made it. She managed to get the door open, wrestling with the lock one-handed, while supporting the stranger's weight, and half-dragged, half-carried him up the narrow staircase. The stairs creaked under their combined weight, and Sarah sent up a prayer that old Mrs. Henderson in the apartment below them wasn't home. The woman complained about everything, including footsteps that were too loud. At her apartment door, she fumbled for her keys with numb fingers that refused to cooperate, dropping them once before finally getting the door unlocked. "Mrs. Chen?" she called as she pushed the door open, her voice breathless and strained. The warm air from inside hit her face like a wall, the contrast so stark it almost hurt. The apartment smelled like the ginger tea Mrs. Chen always made, mixed with the faint scent of the pine-scented candle Sarah had lit that morning. The elderly woman appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her eyes widening in shock behind her thick glasses. Mrs. Chen was small, even smaller than Sarah, with iron gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and a face lined with 80 years of life experience. She'd lived in Pine Ridge her entire life, had raised 3 children in this very building back when her late husband ran the hardware store below. "Sarah, what on earth?" Mrs. Chen's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes taking in the scene. Sarah, disheveled and panting, supporting a nearly unconscious man who was dripping melted snow all over the worn carpet. "I found him in the square. He was freezing. I couldn't just leave him." Sarah maneuvered the man to the couch, where he collapsed with a grateful groan that was almost animal in its intensity. His body seemed to simply give up the fight now that he was somewhere warm, folding in on itself like a puppet with cut strings. Mrs. Chen rushed over, her movements quick and efficient despite her age, her weathered hands immediately checking his pulse at his wrist, then at his neck, her fingers pressing against his skin with practiced precision. She'd been a nurse once, years ago, before retiring, had worked in the county hospital's emergency room for 30 years before arthritis forced her to stop. She touched his forehead, his cheeks, pulled back his eyelids to check his pupils. "He's hypothermic," she announced, her voice clinical and calm, the nurse in her taking over. "Stage 2, maybe early stage 3. We need to warm him up slowly. Too fast and we could cause cardiac arrest. Sarah, get some blankets, all of them, and fill the bathtub with lukewarm water, not hot. Lukewarm. I'll make something warm for him to drink. Broth would be best, but tea will do if that's all we have." For the next hour, they worked together in perfect synchronization, moving around each other with practiced ease born from years of neighborly friendship. Sarah piled every blanket she owned onto the stranger. The heavy quilt from her bed, the fleece throw from the back of the couch, the knitted Afghan misses Chen had made for Emma last winter, even the sleeping bag Sarah kept in the closet for emergencies. She layered them on carefully, remembering what Mrs. Chen had said about warming him slowly. While Mrs. Chen prepared warm broth from a packet in the kitchen, Sarah removed his wet shoes, expensive leather Oxfords that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and his socks, which were soaked through. His feet were pale, almost blue, and she rubbed them gently, trying to restore circulation. She wanted to remove his wet jacket too, but Mrs. Chen stopped her. "Not yet. His core temperature is too low. We remove the wet clothes after he's more stable." Underneath, his dress shirt clung to him, and Sarah noticed it looked like designer wear, the kind of thing that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Who was this man? Slowly, color began to return to his face. His shivering decreased. His eyes, when they opened again, were clearer, more focused. "Where?" he started, his voice rough but more coherent now, like sandpaper against wood. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Where am I?" "My apartment," Sarah said gently, settling into the armchair across from him, suddenly aware of how she must look, her uniform rumpled and stained from the dinner rush, her hair falling out of its ponytail, mascara probably smudged under her eyes from the cold and exertion. "In Pine Ridge. I found you in the town square. You were nearly frozen. Another hour and—" She didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what another hour would have meant. He looked at her, really looked at her, his blue eyes focusing on her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. There was intelligence in those eyes, and pain, and something else she couldn't quite identify. "You helped me," he said, as if the concept was surprising, as if he'd expected something different from the world. "Of course I did. I couldn't just leave you there." Sarah said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, as if there had never been any other option. Most people would have. There was something sad in his voice, something that spoke of experience, of disappointments that had accumulated over time until they'd become his default expectation. Most people would have walked right past, convinced themselves I was drunk or homeless, or that it wasn't their problem, that someone else would handle it. Mrs. Chen handed him a mug of warm broth, her arthritic fingers steady despite her age. "Drink this slowly. Don't gulp it. Small sips. Your body needs to adjust gradually." Her tone was firm, but not unkind. The voice of someone who'd spent decades caring for people, who knew exactly how to balance authority with compassion. He obeyed, his hands still shaking slightly as he held the mug, requiring both hands to keep it steady. After a few sips, color continuing to return to his cheeks, he looked up at both women. "Thank you, truly. I don't know what I was thinking." His voice cracked on the last word, and Sarah saw his eyes grow suspiciously bright. He blinked rapidly, fighting back tears with the same determination he must have used to build whatever life he'd been living before tonight. "What were you doing out there without a coat?" Sarah asked, leaning forward in her chair, her elbows on her knees. "On Christmas Eve?" It was the question that had been bothering her since she'd found him. No one ended up freezing in a town square by accident, especially not someone who could clearly afford better. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the mug like it held answers instead of just chicken broth from a packet. Sarah thought maybe he wouldn't answer, that he'd deflect or change the subject or simply refuse to talk about it. Then he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Running away, or trying to." He laughed, but it was bitter, self-deprecating, the kind of laugh that held no humor at all. Clearly didn't get very far. Made it what? 40 miles from the city? Not exactly a successful escape. Mrs. Chen patted Sarah's shoulder with her small, weathered hand, her touch gentle but firm. "I should go. My daughter's expecting me for Christmas breakfast tomorrow, and I need to catch the early bus." She lived with her daughter now, had moved in after her husband passed 5 years ago, but she still kept her apartment in Pine Ridge for the days when she wanted her own space, her own quiet. She looked at the stranger with sharp eyes that had seen everything in her 80 years, eyes that could spot a liar at 50 paces, or recognize genuine remorse just as quickly. "You be good, young man. This girl has a kind heart, one of the kindest I've ever known. She works herself to the bone, sacrifices everything for her daughter, and still finds it in herself to help strangers on Christmas Eve. Don't make her regret helping you. Don't you dare take advantage of her goodness." "I won't," he promised, and there was something in his voice that made Sarah believe him, a sincerity that seemed to come from somewhere deep and true. "You have my word. I could never hurt someone who just saved my life." After Mrs. Chen left, bundling herself in her thick winter coat and accepting Sarah's offer to call her a cab. Even though they both knew Sarah couldn't really afford it, silence settled over the small apartment like a blanket. Sarah could hear the wind howling outside, rattling the old windows in their frames, making the glass shake. She could hear the radiator clanking as it worked to heat the apartment, a sound she'd grown so accustomed to she barely noticed it anymore. She could hear her own heartbeat, still elevated from the exertion and the adrenaline and the strange intimacy of sitting here with a man whose name she didn't even know. Sarah could hear the wind howling outside, rattling the windows. She should probably feel afraid, sitting here alone with a strange man, a man who was bigger and stronger than her even in his weakened state. But she didn't. There was something about him, something fundamentally decent beneath the expensive clothes and the sad eyes and the obvious wealth. Maybe it was the way he'd thanked them so genuinely, without the condescension she might have expected from someone who clearly came from money. Maybe it was the vulnerability he'd shown, the tears he'd tried to hide, the raw honesty in his voice when he talked about running away. Or maybe Sarah was just tired of being afraid all the time, tired of second-guessing every decision, tired of letting fear dictate her life. She'd taken a chance tonight, and so far, it seemed to be working out. "I'm Sarah," she offered, tucking her legs under her in the armchair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, how much her body ached. "Sarah Mitchell." He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. And in that hesitation, Sarah saw a decision being made, saw him weighing options she couldn't begin to understand. "James," he said finally, and there was something careful in the way he said it, something deliberate. "James Bennett." "Well, James Bennett, you picked a hell of a night to have a crisis." She smiled slightly to show she was teasing, trying to lighten the heavy atmosphere that had settled over the room. "What were you running from?" He stared into his mug, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals, his blue eyes tracking the movement like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "Everything. My life, my responsibilities, the expectations that have been crushing me slowly for years now, so gradually I didn't even notice until I couldn't breathe anymore. He shook his head, a strand of dark hair falling across his forehead. I'm sorry, you don't want to hear about this. I'm a stranger who you probably think is crazy, who almost died because he couldn't handle his own privileged life. How pathetic is that? We've got time, Sarah said, surprised by how much she meant it. She should be sleeping, should be conserving her energy for tomorrow, for the Christmas morning she'd planned with Emma, for the shift she'd have to work the day after Christmas because the diner never really closed. But something about this man, this moment, felt important in a way she couldn't articulate. And I'm a waitress. People tell me their life stories over coffee all the time. You'd be amazed what people will share with someone who's just refilling their cup and pretending not to judge. So he told her, slowly at first, then faster, the words pouring out like he'd been holding them back for years, and had finally found someone who would listen without expectations, without judgment, without already knowing who he was supposed to be. How he'd grown up with everything: money, privilege, opportunities that most people could only dream about, a sprawling estate in Connecticut with more rooms than they knew what to do with, private tutors when school got difficult, summer homes in the Hamptons, and ski trips to Aspen and European vacations that lasted for months. How his father had built a business empire from nothing, starting with a single medical supply store and growing it into a company that now employed thousands. How from the time James could walk, his father had been grooming him to take over, telling him stories about the business at bedtime instead of fairy tales, taking him to the office on weekends, teaching him to read financial reports before he learned to read chapter books. How, for years, decades really, James had done exactly what was expected. The right schools, starting with a prestigious boarding school at age 13, then Harvard for undergrad and Wharton for his MBA. The right job, starting in the family business in the lowest position to learn from the ground up, even though everyone knew he'd be CEO eventually. The right social circle, attending charity galas and country club events and fundraisers where the minimum donation was more than most people made in a year. The right relationships, dating women his mother approved of, women from the right families with the right pedigrees, women who understood the world he lived in and the expectations that came with it. How somewhere along the way, maybe years ago, maybe just recently, he'd looked up from the life he was living and realized he didn't recognize it anymore, didn't recognize himself in the mirror, didn't recognize the person who said the things he said, who made the decisions he made, who lived in that enormous house and drove that expensive car and wore those tailored suits. I was supposed to have Christmas dinner tonight with 300 people I barely know, he continued, his voice taking on an edge of desperation, like he needed Sarah to understand, needed someone to finally understand. Business associates, investors, board members, society people whose names I can never remember but whose faces I'm supposed to recognize. All of them expecting me to give a speech about taking over the company, about continuing my father's legacy, about the exciting future ahead, about vision and growth and shareholder value and all these things that are supposed to matter but feel completely meaningless. I had the speech memorized. 37 drafts reviewed by 3 different PR firms to make sure every word was perfect, every pause calculated for maximum impact. His hands tightened around the mug. I couldn't do it. I got in my car and drove, and I ended up here. And then you decided to take a nap in the snow? Sarah's tone was gentle, not mocking, but there was concern there too. Because she understood now, or thought she did, what had really happened tonight. This wasn't just about someone getting cold. This was about someone giving up. I parked by the square, got out to walk, to think. I was only supposed to be out there for a minute, just to clear my head. He closed his eyes, and Sarah saw shame flash across his face. But it was so peaceful, so quiet after the chaos of my life. And I was so tired, Sarah, so bone-deep exhausted in a way that sleep never seems to fix. You probably understand that, don't you? That kind of tired that lives in your soul? He opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked at her, and she felt seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly comforting. I do, Sarah admitted quietly, thinking of all the nights she'd fallen into bed so exhausted she couldn't even remember closing her eyes, all the mornings she'd woken up still tired, all the moments she'd wondered how she'd make it through another day. I understand that better than you might think." I sat down for just a moment, James continued, his voice dropping even lower, like he was confessing something shameful. Just to rest. The snow was falling, and the cold was almost comfortable in a weird way, like a blanket, like being numb. And I closed my eyes and thought about how easy it would be to just not get up, to just sit there and let the cold take over. Let it make all the decisions. Let it be someone else's problem. I wasn't actively trying to hurt myself, I swear to you, but I wasn't trying very hard to save myself either. Does that make sense? Sarah understood. She understood more than he probably realized, more than she wanted to admit even to herself. The weight of expectation, even if hers came from completely different circumstances. The expectation to be mother and father, provider and comforter, strong and soft all at once. The bone-deep exhaustion that made danger seem preferable to taking another step, that made giving up seem easier than continuing. The moment when you're so tired that you can't even remember why you're supposed to keep fighting. She'd had those moments too, in the weeks after Emma's father left, when she'd been alone with a toddler and no money and no hope. Moments when she'd wondered if Emma would be better off with someone else, someone who had their life together, someone who wasn't breaking apart at the seams. "Well, I'm glad I found you," she said simply, because what else was there to say? She couldn't undo his pain or fix his life or make his choices for him. But she could offer him this, a warm place to rest, someone who would listen without judgment, a reminder that he mattered to someone, even if that someone was a stranger he'd known for less than 2 hours. They talked for hours after that, the conversation flowing easily despite the strangeness of the situation, about everything and nothing. James asked about her life, and Sarah found herself telling him things she rarely shared with anyone. Stories about Emma's father leaving, about how she'd been 24 and completely unprepared for single motherhood, about working 3 jobs when Emma was a baby, before she'd found steady work at the diner, cleaning houses at 6 in the morning, cashiering at the grocery store in the afternoons, waitressing at night while Mrs. Chen watched Emma, about sleeping 4 hours a night and living on coffee and pure determination, about the constant juggling act of trying to be enough. Enough money, enough time, enough patience, enough love. About the guilt that ate at her every day, the feeling that she was failing Emma somehow, that her daughter deserved better than this life of scraped-together Christmases and secondhand everything. "You're not just enough," James said, his voice intense in a way that made Sarah's breath catch. He leaned forward, his blue eyes locked on hers. "From what you're telling me, from what I've seen tonight, you're extraordinary. You're not failing Emma. You're showing her what real strength looks like, what real love looks like. Do you think she cares that her clothes come from thrift stores? That your apartment is small? That your Christmas tree is artificial? She cares that you're there. That you work yourself to exhaustion to give her a good life. That you stopped to help a stranger on Christmas Eve even when you were exhausted and cold and probably just wanted to get home to her." Sarah laughed, embarrassed by the emotion clogging her throat. "I'm really not. I'm just doing what any mother would do." She wiped at her eyes quickly, hoping he wouldn't notice the tears gathering there. "That's not true, and you know it," James insisted. "You're raising a daughter alone, working yourself to exhaustion, and you still stopped to help a stranger tonight. When you should have been home resting, when you had every reason to keep walking, when helping me could have put you in danger for all you knew. You saw someone who needed help, and you didn't hesitate. That's not ordinary, Sarah. That's exceptional. That's the kind of person I've spent years surrounded by wealth and privilege searching for and never finding." Before Sarah could respond, before she could deflect the compliment the way she always did because accepting praise felt dangerous somehow, a small voice came from the hallway, soft and sleepy and utterly perfect. "Mommy?" Sarah's heart jumped, not with fear, but with love so intense it was almost painful. She turned to see Emma standing there in her worn pajamas, the pink ones with the unicorns that were getting too small, but that Emma refused to give up. Her blonde hair was messy from sleep, sticking up at odd angles in a way that Sarah found adorable. She was clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, the one Sarah had found at a yard sale 3 years ago, and had carefully washed and mended until it was almost like new. Emma's blue eyes, so like her father's, though Sarah tried not to think about that, were sleepy but curious. "Baby, what are you doing awake? It's so late." Sarah stood and went to her daughter, automatically smoothing her hair, checking her temperature with the back of her hand the way she always did, making sure Emma was okay. It was past 10 now, well past Emma's bedtime, and Sarah felt a pang of guilt that their voices must have woken her. But Emma, being Emma, wasn't focused on why she'd been woken up. Her attention was already elsewhere, her natural curiosity taking over. She walked right up to James with no fear whatsoever, no hesitation, just pure 7-year-old boldness. "Who's that?" She pointed at James with her stuffed rabbit, using it like an extension of her own hand. "This is Mr. Bennett. James, he wasn't feeling well, so I'm helping him. He's going to leave soon." Sarah stood and went to her daughter, smoothing her hair, but Emma, being Emma, walked right up to James with no fear whatsoever. "Hi, Mr. James. Are you okay now?" James looked stunned for a moment, then his expression softened in a way that transformed his whole face. "Hi, Emma. Yes, I'm much better, thanks to your mom. My mom helps everybody. She's the best." Emma said it with such simple certainty that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I can see that," James said seriously. "You're very lucky to have her." "I know." Emma yawned widely, her small mouth opening to show the gap where she'd lost her 2 front teeth just last month. She'd been so excited about the tooth fairy, had carefully placed each tooth under her pillow and woken up to find a $1 coin. All Sarah could manage, though she knew other kids at school got $5 or even $10. But Emma had been thrilled anyway, had run around the apartment showing everyone her coin like it was a treasure beyond measure. "Is tomorrow still Christmas?" "Yes, baby, tomorrow's still Christmas. Santa's probably loading up his sleigh right now." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, bringing herself eye to eye with her daughter. "Come on, back to bed. You know Santa can't come if you're awake." "But I wasn't trying to stay awake," Emma protested, though she was already rubbing her eyes again, fatigue making her movements slow and clumsy. "I just heard voices and wanted to make sure you were okay. Sometimes you come home really late and you're really tired, and I worry about you." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Her 7-year-old worried about her. Her baby, who should be thinking about nothing more serious than toys and cartoons and what to play at recess, was lying awake worrying about her mother. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't need to worry about me. I'm always okay. I promise." "But you're always tired," Emma said with the blunt honesty of children who haven't yet learned to soften difficult truths. "And sometimes I hear you crying at night when you think I'm asleep. And Mrs. Chen says you work too hard." Sarah felt James's eyes on her, felt him witnessing this moment of vulnerability she'd rather have kept private. She forced a smile, the same bright smile she'd perfected over years of pretending everything was fine. "I'm okay, baby, I promise. Mommies get tired sometimes, that's normal. And if I cry, it's just because I'm happy to have you. Happy tears, okay?" Sarah kissed her forehead. "You have a gift for that, sweetheart. Now sleep. Santa can't come if you're awake." When she returned to the living room, James was standing carefully folding the blankets. "I should go. I've imposed enough." "Go where? It's the middle of the night and it's still snowing. The motels will be closed." He looked uncomfortable. "I can't stay here. It's not appropriate. And you've already done so much. The couch converts to a bed. You'll stay tonight, and in the morning, you can figure out what you're going to do next." Sarah's tone left no room for argument. "Besides, it's Christmas Eve. Nobody should be alone on Christmas Eve." Something in his expression cracked, just slightly. "Thank you," he whispered. They made up the sofa bed together in comfortable silence. Sarah found an extra pillow and a warm quilt her grandmother had made years ago. Before she went to her own room, she paused. "James, whatever you're running from, whatever you're trying to figure out, I hope you find your answer. You seem like a good person who's just lost his way." "I think maybe I just found it," he said quietly. "Or at least, I found a sign pointing me in the right direction." Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the storm having passed in the night. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and something cooking. Confused and still half asleep, she pulled on her robe and padded out to the kitchen. James stood at her stove, flipping pancakes. He'd somehow found her apron, the ridiculous one with ruffles that Emma had picked out at a yard sale, and he wore it over his dress shirt and pants without any self-consciousness. "You're cooking," Sarah said, dumbfounded. "I hope you don't mind. I woke up early and couldn't sleep, and I thought I'd make myself useful. I found everything I needed in your kitchen. You have a surprising amount of pancake mix for someone who works at a diner." "Emma's favorite," Sarah explained, still processing the surreal scene. "But you don't have to." "I want to." He flipped a pancake expertly. "It's the least I can do. Besides, I actually love cooking. Don't get much chance to do it anymore." Emma burst out of her room moments later, her eyes lighting up at the sight of James. "Mr. James, you're still here, and you're making pancakes. Merry Christmas, Emma. I hope you like chocolate chips. I found some in the cupboard and may have gotten a little carried away." They ate breakfast together. The three of them crowded around Sarah's small kitchen table. Emma chattered happily about Christmas, about the traditions she and her mom had, about what she hoped Santa might bring. James listened with genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at Emma's stories. Sarah watched them together and felt something strange in her chest, something warm and terrifying all at once. This felt like family, like what Christmas morning was supposed to be. And it made her realize just how lonely she'd been, how much she'd convinced herself that she and Emma didn't need anyone else. After breakfast, Emma insisted that James help them decorate their tree. It was a small artificial tree Sarah had bought half price after last Christmas, but Emma treated it like it was the most beautiful thing in the world. They hung ornaments that were mostly handmade or from the dollar store, and James praised each one as if it were a priceless treasure. "This one I made in kindergarten," Emma said, holding up a crooked star made of popsicle sticks. "And this one is from when Mommy and I went to the beach, and we found the shell." "They're perfect," James said. "Much better than the designer trees I'm used to." "What's a designer tree?" Emma asked, confused. "A tree that's trying too hard," James said with a wink. "Your tree is just right." Around mid-morning, James's phone rang. He'd found it in his jacket pocket, dead from the cold, and Sarah had let him charge it. He looked at the screen and winced. "I should take this," he said apologetically. "It's my sister." He stepped into the hallway, and even with the door closed, Sarah could hear the conversation. Raised voices. Words like terrified and irresponsible, and everyone's been looking for you. When he came back in, he looked older somehow. Tired again. The weight back on his shoulders. "I have to go," he said. "My family's been worried sick. Apparently there's been search parties and police reports and..." He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean to cause such a panic. I just needed to get away." "Of course," Sarah said, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. "You should be with your family on Christmas." "Will you come back?" Emma asked, her small voice hopeful. James knelt down to her level. "I'd like that very much, Emma, if your mom says it's okay." He looked at Sarah, and she saw so much in his eyes. Regret, gratitude, something else she didn't want to name. "You're always welcome here," she managed to say. James stood, hesitated, then pulled out his wallet. "Please, let me give you something." "For the trouble, for..." "Absolutely not," Sarah cut him off, her voice firm. "I didn't help you for money. I know that, I want to do something. You made us pancakes. That's more than enough." She smiled. "Go on, your family's waiting." He left, but not before giving Emma a hug and squeezing Sarah's hand. "Thank you," he said one more time, "for everything. You saved my life, Sarah Mitchell, in more ways than one." And then he was gone, and the apartment felt suddenly empty and too quiet. Emma looked up at her mom. "Will we really see him again?" Sarah pulled her daughter close. "I don't know, baby, but that's okay. We helped someone who needed it, and that's what matters." But as the day went on, Sarah found herself thinking about James constantly, wondering where he was, if he was okay, if he'd found what he was looking for. She told herself it was silly to feel this way about someone she'd known for less than 12 hours. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had happened last night, something more than just helping a stranger. The next few days passed in their usual routine. Sarah worked her shifts at the diner. Emma played with the modest presents Santa had brought. Sarah had managed to scrape together enough for a small art set, not the deluxe one Emma had wanted, but her daughter's face had lit up like it was everything she'd ever dreamed of anyway. There was no word from James, and Sarah tried not to feel disappointed. He had his life, and she had hers. It had been a chance encounter, nothing more, until the day the envelope arrived. Sarah was sorting through mail, mostly bills that made her stomach clench, when she found it. A thick, cream-colored envelope with her name written in elegant script. No return address. Inside was a letter and something else that made her heart stop. A check for $50,000. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. $50,000! More money than she'd seen in her entire life. She forced herself to read the letter, her vision blurring with tears. Dear Sarah, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking about Christmas Eve every day since I left your apartment, trying to find the words to express what that night meant to me. You saved my life. I know I said that before, but I don't think you understood how literally I meant it. I was in a dark place that night, darker than I've ever been. I'd lost myself completely in the expectations and pressures of a life I never chose. Sitting in that snow, I felt nothing, and nothing seemed preferable to the pain of continuing. Then you appeared. You, with your worn coat and your tired eyes and your stubborn kindness. You had every reason to walk past me. You had your own struggles, your own worries, your own exhaustion. But you stopped, you helped, you welcomed me into your home and treated me like I mattered. And then I met Emma, and I saw what real love looks like, what real strength looks like. Sarah, you're raising an incredible little girl while working yourself to the bone, and you're still the kind of person who stops to help a stranger. That's not just enough. That's extraordinary. The money is not charity. It's not pity. It's me paying forward the kindness you showed me. It's me trying to give you even a fraction of what you gave me. A chance to breathe, to rest, to imagine possibilities. Use it however you need. Pay bills, save for Emma's future, take a vacation, or just keep it for emergencies. No strings attached, no expectations. But I would like to see you again, if you're willing. Not because of the money, because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. About the way you saw me at my worst, and still treated me with such gentle dignity. About your strength and your love for your daughter, and the way you made coffee in that tiny kitchen and told me about your life like it mattered to you that I knew. My real name is James Bennett, and I wasn't completely honest about who I am. I didn't lie, exactly, but I didn't tell you the whole truth. My family owns Bennett Industries. Perhaps you've heard of it. We manufacture medical equipment and supplies. I'm the CEO, or at least I was supposed to be. The night you found me, I was supposed to be at the company's annual Christmas gala, accepting the official transition of power from my father. Obviously, I didn't make it. Instead, I had a complete breakdown in your town square. But here's the thing, Sarah. It was the best decision I ever made, because it led me to you. And that night in your apartment showed me what was missing from my life. Not just human connection, though, that was part of it, but purpose, meaning, the understanding that having everything means nothing if you're not giving anything that matters. I've made some changes since that night. I accepted the CEO position, but on my own terms. I'm restructuring the company to focus more on charitable work, providing medical equipment to underserved communities, funding free health clinics, creating scholarship programs. The board isn't thrilled, but I don't care. I finally understand what my father tried to tell me for years, that with great privilege comes great responsibility, and that responsibility is to do good. You taught me that, Sarah. You, in your tiny apartment with your secondhand Christmas tree, and your homemade ornaments, and your daughter's unconditional love. You showed me what real wealth looks like. There's a phone number at the bottom of this letter. It's my direct line. If you want to talk, I'd love to hear from you. If you don't, I understand completely. You've already given me more than I had any right to ask for. But I'm hoping you'll call, because I'd really like to take you and Emma out for dinner. Somewhere nice, where you can order whatever you want without checking the prices. Where Emma can have dessert if she wants it. Where I can look across the table and see the woman who saved me in every possible way, with deepest gratitude and affection. James. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. James Bennett, Bennett Industries. She'd heard of them, of course. Everyone had. They were one of the largest medical supply companies in the country, and she'd given the CEO pancakes and let him sleep on her couch. She should have felt angry that he hadn't told her the truth, or intimidated by the money and power he represented, or overwhelmed by the check that would change her and Emma's life completely. Instead, she felt something that scared her more than anything else: hope. It took her 2 days to gather the courage to call the number. She must have picked up the phone and put it back down a dozen times. What would she even say? What could someone like her possibly have to offer someone like him? But then she thought about that night, about the way he'd looked at her, not with pity or condescension, but with genuine respect and admiration, about the way he'd listened to her stories like they mattered, about the way he'd knelt down to talk to Emma like she was the most important person in the world. He'd been real with her. The least she could do was be real with him. She called from the diner during her break, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "James Bennett," he answered on the second ring, his voice brisk and professional. "It's Sarah," she said, and then couldn't think of anything else to say. "Sarah Mitchell, from Pine Ridge." The silence on the other end lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like forever. Then his voice changed completely, became warm and soft. "Sarah, God, I was hoping you'd call. I was starting to think I'd scared you away with the letter. You didn't scare me. James, that check. It's too much. I can't possibly accept—" "Please," he interrupted gently. "Please accept it. For Emma, if not for yourself. Let me do this one thing." "But why? You don't owe me anything." "I owe you everything," he said simply. "Sarah, you gave me my life back. Let me give you a little bit of breathing room in yours." They talked for an hour. Sarah curled up in the diner's back office while her coworker covered her tables. They talked about everything: his work restructuring the company, her hesitation about accepting the money, Emma's progress in school, his sister's relief that he was okay. It felt easy, natural, like continuing a conversation that had never really ended. "I meant what I said about dinner," James said finally. "Would you and Emma like to come visit? There's an amazing Italian place near my office. Emma would love it. They let kids make their own pizzas." "James, that's very kind, but no buts. Please, I want to see you again. Both of you." And Sarah, who had learned to be cautious, who had built walls around her heart to protect herself and her daughter, found herself saying yes. The dinner was everything James had promised and more. The restaurant was beautiful, with warm lighting and a cozy atmosphere that somehow didn't feel intimidating. Emma was in heaven making her own personal pizza, and the chef even gave her a little chef's hat, which she refused to take off. James was attentive and funny, and he looked at Sarah like she was the only person in the room. It was the first of many dinners, many visits. James would drive up to Pine Ridge on weekends, or Sarah and Emma would take the train to the city. Sometimes they'd do fancy things, museums and nice restaurants and shows. Other times they'd do simple things, walk in the park, watch movies, make dinner together in James's ridiculously large kitchen. Emma adored James, and the feeling was clearly mutual. He never talked down to her, never treated her like she was in the way. He helped her with her art projects and played elaborate imaginary games with her stuffed animals and listened to her endless stories with patient interest. But it was the quiet moments that made Sarah fall in love with him. The way he'd reach for her hand while they walked. The way he'd look at her when she was talking. Like every word mattered. The way he'd shown up at the diner one day during her shift just to bring her a coffee and a warm scarf because he'd noticed hers was falling apart. "I don't understand what you see in me," Sarah admitted one night, several months into whatever this was. They were sitting on James's balcony, wrapped in blankets, watching the city lights. Emma was asleep inside on the guest room bed she'd claimed as her own. "What do you mean?" James turned to look at her, genuine confusion on his face. "You could have anyone, someone from your world, someone who understands fancy parties and board meetings and whatever else people like you do." "People like me," James repeated slowly. "Sarah, do you know why I go to those fancy parties? Why I sit through those board meetings? Because now I have a reason. Because I'm trying to build something that would make you proud, something that honors the lesson you taught me about what actually matters. I didn't teach you anything. You taught me everything." He pulled her closer, tucking her against his side. "You taught me that kindness doesn't cost anything, that real wealth is measured in love, not money. that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones the world overlooks. "You're being ridiculous," Sarah said, but her voice was thick with emotion. "I'm being honest." He tilted her chin up so she had to look at him. "I love you, Sarah Mitchell. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you love your daughter. I love that you stopped for me that night when anyone else would have kept walking. I love the way you see the world, the way you move through it, trying to make it a little bit better despite everything it's thrown at you." "James," Sarah started, but he pressed a gentle finger to her lips. "You don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know." But Sarah did say it back because it was true. She loved him. She loved his kindness and his quiet strength and the way he'd let her see his vulnerability. She loved how he treated Emma like she was his own. She loved that he'd taken everything he'd learned from one snowy Christmas night and used it to try to make the world better. The proposal came on Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the night they'd met. James had arranged for them to return to Pine Ridge, to the town square where everything had started. The enormous Christmas tree was lit up again, more beautiful than Sarah remembered. Emma knew it was coming. James had asked her permission first, which had made Sarah cry when he'd told her later. Her daughter was practically vibrating with excitement, holding Sarah's hand as they walked into the square. James stood beneath the tree, and Sarah's breath caught. He looked just like he had that night. Same suit, no coat, his dark hair slightly messy, but his eyes were completely different. No longer sad and lost. Now they were full of joy and hope and love. "Sarah Mitchell," he said as she approached, "1 year ago, I sat down under this tree, and I thought my life was over. I was so lost, so tired, so convinced that nothing mattered." He dropped to one knee, and Sarah's heart stopped. And then an angel appeared. An angel in a worn coat with holes in her boots, who was exhausted from working all day, who was worried about making rent and buying Christmas presents, who had every reason to keep walking, but she didn't. She stopped. She helped. She saved me. Emma squeezed Sarah's hand excitedly. "You've made this year the best year of my life," James continued, pulling out a small velvet box. "You've taught me what it means to truly live, to love, to give, and I don't want to spend another day without you, without both of you." He looked at Emma, who grinned so wide her face might split, then back at Sarah. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the gift you gave me? Will you let me be a husband to you and a father to Emma?" Sarah was crying, couldn't seem to stop, couldn't find words, so she just nodded over and over while Emma jumped up and down squealing, "Yes, yes, say yes, Mommy!" "Yes," Sarah finally managed. "Yes, absolutely yes." James slipped the ring on her finger. It was beautiful, but not ostentatious. Exactly right. And then he was standing and pulling her into his arms, kissing her while Emma wrapped herself around both their legs, and snow began to fall again, soft and gentle. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, in the little church in Pine Ridge. Sarah wore a simple white dress, and Emma was her maid of honor in a sparkly blue dress she'd picked out herself. James's family came, and they were welcoming and warm to Sarah, though she'd been terrified to meet them. But James's sister pulled her aside before the ceremony. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for bringing my brother back to us. He was disappearing before that night, becoming someone we didn't recognize. You reminded him who he really is." The reception was at the diner where Sarah had worked, which had been transformed with flowers and lights, and all the people from the town who'd become her family over the years. They danced and ate and celebrated, and Sarah kept looking at her new husband in wonder, unable to quite believe this was her life now. James had wanted to buy them a big house, but Sarah had insisted on staying in Pine Ridge. "This is Emma's home," she'd said. "These are our people." So they'd compromised. A comfortable house on the edge of town, big enough for their growing family, but still part of the community Sarah loved, because there was going to be a growing family. Sarah was 3 months pregnant, a fact they'd shared with Emma just that morning. Her daughter had cried happy tears and immediately started planning how she was going to be the best big sister ever. As they swayed together on the dance floor, James whispered in Sarah's ear, "Have I told you today that you're the best thing that ever happened to me?" "At least 5 times," Sarah said with a smile. but I don't mind hearing it again. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," he repeated obediently. Then, more seriously, "I mean it, you know, all of it. You saved my life that night, and you've made every day since then worth living." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected softly. "You showed me that it's okay to let someone in, to accept help, to believe that good things can happen." Years later, when people would ask them about their love story, they'd tell the tale of that snowy Christmas Eve, about how Sarah, tired and struggling and barely making ends meet, had stopped to help a stranger, about how that stranger had turned out to be something more, not because of his money or his name, but because of his heart. They'd tell people about the pancakes and the homemade ornaments, and the little girl who'd seen through everything to the sad man who needed kindness, about how one act of compassion had changed two lives completely. And every Christmas Eve, they'd return to that spot in the town square, under that enormous tree with its hundreds of lights. They'd stand there, Sarah and James and Emma, and eventually their son Daniel, and they'd remember. They'd remember that magic is real, that kindness matters, that love can appear when you least expect it. James would pull Sarah close and kiss her forehead, and she'd lean into him, still amazed after all these years that this was her life, that the stranger she'd found in the snow had become her forever. "Thank you," he'd whisper, like he did every year, "for seeing me, for saving me, for loving me." And Sarah, who'd learned that she was allowed to be loved just as fiercely as she loved, would whisper back, "Thank you for stopping, for staying, for choosing us." Because that's what Christmas miracles really are, not magic appearing from nowhere, but two people finding each other exactly when they need to. Two lives intersecting at the perfect moment. Two hearts recognizing in each other what the rest of the world might have missed. That snowy Christmas night, Sarah had given a stranger warmth and shelter and basic human kindness. And in return, he'd given her the world, not because of his wealth or his name, but because he'd seen her, truly seen her, and loved what he found. The strong, stubborn, beautiful woman who'd saved his life with nothing more than compassion and a couch to sleep on. And as for what his true identity had been, it wasn't CEO or billionaire or heir to a fortune. His true identity was simply this: the man who was meant to find Sarah Mitchell on that snowy night, the man who was meant to be her partner, Emma's father figure, and eventually the father of her children. The man who was meant to show her that she was worthy of grand gestures and passionate love and a life bigger than she'd ever dared to dream. The man who was meant to be hers, just as she was always meant to be his. Sometimes the greatest Christmas miracles are the simplest ones: a hand extended in kindness, a door opened to a stranger, a heart brave enough to love despite fear and uncertainty. Sarah had given James warmth on the coldest night of his life, and he'd spent every day since then trying to return that gift, warming her world with his love, his devotion, and his unwavering belief that she was, and always had been, absolutely extraordinary. Thank you so much for joining me for this story today. I hope it warmed your heart like a cozy fire on a cold winter's night. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more heartwarming Christmas tales all year long. And don't forget to tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love hearing from you all. Until next time, remember to be kind to strangers. You never know when you might be entertaining angels or changing someone's life forever. I'll see you in the next story.